Hello, everybody. It's James here, WSI, and my next guest. He's a returned customer. He kept his receipt. He wanted his money back. It is indeed the franchise, Shane Douglas. How you doing?
What's up, James? First of all, I got to ask you, is that a Kronk's Gym shirt you have on?
It is a Kronk Gym shirt I've got on.
Yeah. Those are like...
I was going to say, it's like the technical version that you need sunglasses. You get snow blindness looking at this thing.
Yeah. I can see it right across the thing. I haven't seen one of those in years. It seemed like a lot of the guys used to have those shirts. Where did you get that?
Oh, I got it from Amazon. And do you know what? The weird thing was, I've not seen one in years. And then someone walked past me wearing one yesterday, a Kronk hoodie. So I thought, well,
no kidding.
Yeah, brilliant. And before I carry on, I said I was going to do some plugs. So I've got 2 books out: The Rock, the People's Champion, and Owen Hart, King of Pranks. In fact, you're in it, Shane. Briefly, I mentioned one of your stories is in it, but for the life of me, I can't remember which story it was.
One of the memorable ones. Owen was a great guy, and when you say the word gremlin, what you conjure up in your head. That was Owen. He was always making fun on the road just to break up the monotony. But you couldn't help but laugh being around him because he was a really, really funny guy.
In fact, actually, you contributed unwittingly, I'm sure. It was on another podcast. You contributed a couple of stories, and one of them was Owen said that you were Bret Hart coming out of a tanning salon in Germany, I think.
Yeah.
And you may have to explain this. And the other one was you just saw Owen grind a load of stuff in either Lex Luger's face or British Bulldog's face. But
British Bulldog, yeah.
Oh, go on. Well, tell us the Bulldog one.
So he was in the ring, and you could tell before the match he was up to something because he always had that little grin on his face, right? And he goes to the ring, and he kept telling all of us to watch the match. So we're watching the match, and he takes Bulldog over in a chin lock, and he goes across his face. Bulldog starts wiping his face, and he wipes it again. This goes on several times. And Bulldog comes back, and he's got this beard of like coffee grinds and dirt and oats. And I'm thinking to myself, like, where did Owen have those in his tights? Like, I have trouble hiding my chain, right? So where did he have all that stuff? But that was so typical for Owen. Again, gremlin, right?
Yeah. Did you ever see Owen do the cucumber thing with Undertaker?
No.
Have you ever heard of The Undertaker's apparent phobia for cucumbers, and then as soon as that was found out, everyone ribbed him?
No, I didn't. That's the first I've ever heard it.
Well, there you go. Then Owen Hart, King of Pranks, out now if you want to read about the cucumber. Look at that for a segue. Come on now. We've been talking civics lessons and history and social science and stuff for about 20 minutes. And unfortunately now we've got to talk about wrestling, which is one of those things. But CM Punk... We all know what's happened. I don't know how much you follow modern wrestling, but I mean, you can't help but not notice what's going on at the moment. I presume you're caught up, and who do your loyalties veer towards as far as who's right and who's wrong?
Well, I got it sent to, I think Franny sent me the link. Franny or maybe, I think so, it was Franny. And I waited a few minutes to click on it. When I first clicked on it, I assumed that it was like a rib, like a Babylon Bee type thing. And then I clicked on the video of Punk talking at the press conference. And, Punk's good on camera, right? So I'm drawn into listening to this. And then, like, when my brain clicks as to what he's talking about, what I'm sort of remiss on is I don't know, like, when they do these, was this before, like, right after?
This was directly after the pay-per-view. Directly afterwards.
Okay. And after the incident, obviously.
Well, actually, the pay-per-view happens, then the press conference, and then the fight actually happens during the rest of the press conference.
Oh, okay. So I had it sort of chopped up differently. First of all, the very first thing that I'll throw in here is in our business, in any business, you don't air dirty laundry at work, right? When you're at wrestling for this promotion, AEW, your job is to promote AEW, promote your character, promote your angle, your storyline. Punk's good enough on camera and presence to have said, hey, I got to get out of here. I'm going to be back at the hotel. I don't want to talk about this on company time. Anybody who wants to talk to me, I'll be at the hotel. Now you're doing on your time, very different thing. I think it was a really bad management decision from Khan to opine on that right off that. He's not going to take this effing shit. Because now you're taking sides as the boss. And, we have long talked in the old podcast about this, this meme of the inmates running the asylum there. I can assure you, when I was a kid in the dressing room, I knew I was not in charge. Very, very evident. That if you're going to open your mouth up around these guys, you better have something to say, and it better be for the right reason. Bill Watts used to drill into us, as soon as you walk into that locker room, you're on the clock, you're at work. And so it was incumbent on us to watch the matches to make sure we didn't repeat and so forth. The renowned stories of, you're not allowed to leave before the main event is over, because if you want to be the main event, you got to watch it, learn from it. If I would have at any of those companies, even ECW later, when I was like sort of the senior guy in the dressing room, if I would have gone out on that microphone and gone into business for myself, some kind of dirty laundry that, me and Taz have, will say, or me and Sam have. This thing did happen in the dressing room several times during ECW. And Paul, typically during those, I remember it happening once in Pittsburgh. I remember it happening once in upstate, up by Wilkes-Barre. Anyway, Paul would keep us after the show and have a team meeting in the dressing room or out in the building somewhere. And he would put it down to brass tacks. Shane, do you think Sandman's a valuable contributor? Sandman, do you think Shane, and then you'd come to that and find that middle ground somewhere. But we never aired that outside of the company. And I think just for having done that, I don't know what was precipitating it, but, the talking about lawsuits and stuff found, and God almighty, that's not the place for that. I mean, you just had a pay-per-view, talk about that pay-per-view. Talk about the company. From what I'm looking at, and again, this is just a completely esoteric view looking in from the outside occasionally. I see them climbing up to the million range here and there, and then within a week or two or three, they're down to 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, and then it seems like they build back up again, and it's been this sort of up-down, right?
Well, with the main show, Dynamite, it sort of hangs around maybe 850 to a million, and then their secondary show, Rampage, is under 500 pretty constantly these days, from a million peak on the first show when I think CM Punk debuted. Right.
So you have, when you have 2.5 years, next month will be 3 years, right? Started the third year. And the amount of money that they've been spending there, I would have expected by now on a great outlet like TNT that has the history of wrestling and all of that they would have found that audience that would have allowed them to, when people say competing with Vince is very, WWE now, is very much a monolith, right? It's the entity, it's the NFL of wrestling. So if you're going to compete against that, it's sort of like words I wouldn't use. Keep plugging away at it until you're sort of nipping at the heels. But I see these videos sent to me all the time of Tony Khan, like throwing himself into that mix in a way. And, it's disingenuous. My son plays high school football. It'd be disingenuous for his team to go out there and put a video online and say, hey, we're going to kick the best team in the NFL's ass, right? I mean, everybody just sort of chuckle at it. And it's the same thing here. And now we have this stuff going on that everybody is talking about, right? It's just sort of waylaid the entire conversation. I hope Tony realizes, and this happening, how fast something like this can go off rails and how a poor management decision can allow it to fester and get worse. I was reading yesterday that people tuned in to see if there was going to be a follow-up to sort of fill in those gaps, and it was left sort of nebulous.
Not even that. It was. It didn't even mention Punk and the other guys by name. Just titles were stripped and they were taken out of the intro, so no one's names were even mentioned. So I was talking to Dutch about this yesterday. We had a sort of special episode, and I said, or someone asked, what do you do as a follow-up to make money out of this? And Dutch said, well, you can't now. You've already buried it. You've already put it out of people's minds as best as you can. So well done there. You've left a load of money on the table. Yeah.
Dusty Rhodes' old thing, make chicken salad out of chicken, what.
Mm-hmm. You can swear, by the way.
Okay, good. Oh, fuck it. A little early in the morning for that. But yeah, they, it's, how do I say this? I see Tony getting involved on camera. And that's fine. It's his company. He wants to play that way. How you get involved on camera, I think, is very important. You know, like Mr. McMahon is a character. Vince McMahon is the guy. Everybody knows my differences with Vince. We don't need to go into those. But I will never say Vince is unprofessional. I'd be wondering right now, you know, if I was an executive in TNT, this kind of stuff going on, and this is the company that we're airing, you know, you sort of get this, the audience starting to believe there's some kind of a marriage there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it'll be curious to see. I'm reading yesterday. Well, I'll say this. I heard one thing yesterday. I won't use names because it would sort of pinpoint who told me. There was a meeting ostensibly yesterday with attorneys, and somebody threatened hostile work environment. In America, I don't know how it is in England, but you know, you go and you get that into a courtroom, and with discovery and everything else, there's an awful lot of bad stuff that can come from that.
Yeah, the human resources sort of culture here is, I think, just as bad as America as well. We'll leave that for now then. And what I did was I took a lot of questions from the first interview that we did. I don't think I got to half of them. And then I've also mixed in a load of fan questions as well. Over 100 came in, so hopefully we've got some good ones for you. And this is some pre-WCW stuff. Sunview asks, he wants me to ask you about your time in the Continental territory in 1988, where you tag teamed with the rookie Sid Vicious. I never knew this.
Yeah. My memories of that time were just a lot of fun. We weren't making huge money, but for the baby faces, we were making a lot of money on merchandise. You know, every week, you know, we did these towns every week, and we, you know, for the faces, we were able to sell, you know, 500, 600, 700, 800, you know, up to 1,000 in merch, and you know, we were home pretty much every night. Saturday nights, we would do Dothan, Alabama, which is like a 5-hour drive. We could have gotten home, but we would stay down there because there was a great club down there called Cowboys, where the guys would all hang out. Tracy, Steve, oh my God, there was Sika, Alan Jackson. I mean, there were so many guys there. And we had a great time because it was pretty much like going to work 9 to 5. You go to the building, come wrestle, come back, you know, back at your apartment later that night. It was a lot of fun, but it was a great learning experience for me because Eddie Gilbert, who gave me my break in UWF, had gone to Continental, and he had big visions for getting that up and running, and then running with Fuller, who would run Knoxville, and bringing them together. And so it seemed like a good plan to me, and I really, really trusted in Eddie's booking. But he started having us do these vignettes when Sid was under the humongous mask. Yeah. And it wasn't until much later that he was making me privy as to why we were doing these promos. You know, we'd do a promo where he would make a save. I'd be getting beaten up in the ring and he'd make the save. And one time he gets ink thrown in his eyes and I make the save. But there was never any explanation as to what was this connection. And right at the very tail end, I keep talking. He has me starting to do promos where I'm mentioning Cousin Hugo. And we were supposedly family, and he was like the black sheep of the family type of thing. And unbeknownst to me, this was Hugo under the mask. And unfortunately, I ended up moving on to NWA before we really got to play that completely out. I remember with Sid, I get along great with Sid, you know, but it's just those things that stick out in your mind. We were in Columbus, Mississippi, you know, weekly town we ran. And now remember, the dressing rooms now are kayfabe, right? You can't talk to your opponent until you're in the ring. And he's telling me that he wants to do like all these head scissors and kip ups, and well, like, guy, you're a 7-foot monster. Like, don't do that, right? And he wants to do a spot where he has Sika, the wild Samoan, get down on all fours like Schoolboy, have Alan Jackson push him, and he takes the bump over Sika. I said, yeah, don't say that. Don't try to do that spot. You know, see, like, first of all, Sika's never going to do that, right? And plus, it's not people our stature to tell somebody like Sika what to do in the ring. So I see him in the ring. He's got Sika in the corner. He's choking him, and I can see the mask going up and down like this. I'm oh crap! Call him the spot, right? So he leaves Sika, and he thinks Sika's coming over to get down behind him, right? And Alan gets up in position for the punch, and Alan had arms this big around, comes off and throws this really lame punch, and Sid just timbers like a tree, right? Meanwhile, Sheik is standing over in the corner with his legs crossed, watching this. And the whole building went completely silent, I guess thinking like Hugo had a heart attack or something. He's just there, just down. And I don't think Sid was happy about that, but lesson learned.
I heard an amazing Sid fact just before, and did you know that in the 1999 in WCW, you were there at the time, Sid got out of a match with Van Hammer by claiming he had allergies?
Really?
Yes, and
I learned stuff on this. Yeah, the other Sid story and you probably heard this one, it's sort of renowned, is we were at the Ramada in College Park, south of the Atlanta airport, where we all pretty much lived. The lady there that ran it, Delane, she was a sweetheart. She took care of us like a mother. It really gave us an easy time. But we were always hanging out at the bar there afterwards, and Sid and Brian Pillman got into it. Now, Brian was a pretty salty kid, played in the NFL, and because he was always smaller, wasn't afraid to fight out bigger, right? And he and Sid went at it, got into it like words, and Sid left. A few minutes later, Sid comes back in, and he has a squeegee. And he wants to fight Brian with a squeegee. It's what are you going to clean him to death? It's just strange to see this 7-foot guy, and Brian is like 5'9", 5'10", with a squeegee.
Now I've got something to throw at you here. Barry Windham I interviewed 2 weeks ago. He said it wasn't Brian Pillman, it was Mike Graham and the squeegee. But was that a separate incident?
I'm positive it happened with Brian. Is it possible that it was? I just saw Barry. I have to ask Barry his take on it, because the bar was always full of people, and it was like across the bar watching. I assume, because I know Brian went outside waiting for him. Interesting. I wonder if it did happen again.
Oh, you've got to get back to me and what if the squeegee was his go-to for more than one fight? That'd be fantastic. Right, we'll move on then. WCW, and you're most well known for your first run in WCW when you start tagging with Johnny Ace, and you both got a couple of tours in All Japan, which I hadn't realised that you went on. I know Johnny Ace was big in All Japan for quite a number of years, and what was it about Mrs. Baba that she just loved about Johnny?
Well, Johnny is, first of all, he's a very smart guy, right? And he was not raised in wrestling, right? He didn't come up in the business. He worked, I want to say, for Honeywell. Mm-hmm. So he had been in that corporate structure and how corporations work and all of that. And, when he would go to places like Japan, he knew that, like, there was Mrs. Baba, like, would fawn over him and stuff. And, by the time I'd gone over, that relationship was well acknowledged. But I'm sure there wasn't like anything, sexual or anything that. It was just, she, understand how the Japanese are. The Japanese are very proud people, very cultured. And he's working for Baba, but she just liked Johnny, right? She saw something in Johnny. Johnny has an amazing knack for being able to remember 20-minute spots. So in Japan, where they would come and typically give you a finish that was 2/3 of the match, Johnny could put that in there, go out there and regurgitate it exactly as given. And I think he found his niche that way in Japan. Baba, my experience, the first time I was with Baba, I'd never met him prior to that. You could tell he carried himself extremely professionally, right? Just he was who he was. And at the last day of the tour, we're being paid. He told me, "You come back anytime." And so we had a couple more trips over there. It just popped in my head, different vein of the same story. Right before we went to Japan, they were figuring us into a lot of storylines. And we were going to be gone for 3 weeks. So we needed an explanation as to why the Dynamic Dudes were gone for this period of time. And, preceding the internet where people couldn't get, they're in Japan right now. So we did a angle, I think it was in Orlando, where the Kiwis, Rip Morgan and Jack Victory, took Rip through a canteen to Jack, and Jack hits Johnny in the face with it. So we go back to the dressing room, and Johnny's like, trying to get his nose to blow out. We're in the shower later, and he's scrubbing. He's like really blowing hard. All of a sudden, his face goes, it blows out. And, oh my God, like something's wrong here. And he had broken a septum, and so all that air had gone into his face. And I think that affected the matches we had in Japan because he wasn't able to do. Oh God. That goes way back. 88, I think, was that first tour. They had to switch up some of the matches while we were over there because he had to let that thing heal.
That injury actually happened in UFC not too long ago, like a Cowboy Cerrone. He did the same thing. He got punched in the nose, and the first thing he blew it, and then they had to stop it in 10 seconds.
It's freaky looking, isn't it?
Yeah, it happened. It happened like that as well. With Johnny, how can I not ask? He's been in the news recently. Was Johnny always just a horn dog throughout his life, or was that just something that developed in later life?
We just talked about dirty laundry, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You can always skip it if you want.
No, Johnny liked to have fun on the road. I remember the first time we went to the WCW was wanting me to get my hair lightened to match up with Johnny, so it looked more like a team. And I had never had the desire to do that. And so made plans. We flew to, the same woman, her name was Cher, that did Johnny's hair. And we went over there, and afterwards we went out to eat at a Hooters chicken wing place. Mm-hmm. And there's this cute little girl behind the counter, and he's flirting with her. And I'm thinking like dude, you live in this town, right? It's St. Peter, whatever, Clearwater. It was in Clearwater. And right in the middle of this, his wife walks in. I'm not sure they were married quite yet, or were going to be married shortly after that. But there's this confrontation that put me like in a really uncomfortable position. And I'm sure that led to issues down the road. Marriages rarely survive this business, right? Mm-hmm. So, one thing about Johnny that I want to throw in, because I think it's prescient with everything that's going on right now, and I'll probably segue to what you want to talk about. I was talking to the guys at the building last night, and I asked them a simple question. I said, have you ever heard a good story about Johnny? And they said, no. It's, all you ever heard from the wrestlers, right? And I said, do you know why? And they said, no. So, well, he's got to play the hatchet man, right? So when Vince wants bad news given to somebody, Johnny's the guy that makes the money to go do that. And he's good at it, having come from that corporate. And the guys that do that, you have to understand their mindset. To them, this is a corporate decision. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a corporate decision. So sorry, James, we got to let you go. For the person, it's obviously a huge life-changing impact. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, as far as how Johnny carried himself in the dressing room or whatever, I can't speak to that. I've never been there with him. So, but I think that he probably gets a worse rap than he should, considering what his job is. When you're the hatchet man, you got to swing the hatchet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move. Well, not quite off Johnny Ace, but I interviewed Kevin Sullivan. I can't remember, 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I recently gave him a litany of some really shitty WCW gimmicks from the late 80s, early 90s. And I said the Juicer or Arachne Man, and then I said the Dynamic Dudes as well, which you never even used to skateboards. And I said, stupid me, Pavlov's gun. I meant the other one, Chekhov's gun, and Pavlov's gun. I was like, I hate it when I just mess these up. Anyway, he said that of all these gimmicks, characters in the late 80s, early 90s, the Dynamic Dudes could have been salvaged quite easily, and it could have actually really had some legs, considering the talent involved of turning you heel, but on purpose. Yeah. Believe it or not, Eddie Gilbert had that idea. I don't know if it got pitched. We had debuted on Music City Showdown in Nashville. First match on the pay-per-view was Simone SWAT team, and those guys got us over huge. They were great. They were always great to work with. And we were called something like Johnny and Shane, the next generation or the new generation. The very next morning in the hotel van heading to the airport, Eddie's sitting in the front. You have to understand, Eddie had a really dry sense of humor.
And he was sitting in the front seat. He turned around and he said, "Well, have you guys heard your new name?" And I know Eddie, right? And it sounds like a setup. So I said, "Okay, I'll bite Eddie. What's our new name?" And I'm thinking, well, we've already aired as this thing, so you really can't change. Stupid me, they're naive me, right? I'm thinking you can't change the name. And he turned around and he said, "The Dynamic Dudes." And I started laughing, and he turned around and went, and I knew that face, and I went, "Please tell me you're ribbon," right? And he went. So that night we were in Bristol. Flair was the head booker, supposedly, of this committee, debacle. And I went to him in full candor, like, "Dude, like you're a legend in this business. You know that name sucks, right?" And Eddie told us in the van that Jim Herd had commissioned these studies in California. The theory being what starts in California works eastward. And the two top words that were used were dynamic and dude. So Jim, in his pizza wisdom, decided to put the two together. And he's, by the way, the same guy that came up with the ding dongs, right?
Can I just interrupt you and ask you, was he commissioning this study purely to find out what these big words are? I mean, how many studies did he commission, and for what purposes?
Yeah, that I don't know, but I'm guessing, like, trying to figure out like what the finger on the pulse of pop culture in America is.
Right.
And so I go to Flair that night in Bristol, and I remember he was up in the third floor dressing room. He was laying on a red leather couch. And I went in to tell him. He jumped above the couch and said, "It's out of my hands. I can't do anything about it." And I thought, like, that's sort of lame, right? Because I've seen bookers pull some pretty good power cards in my day. And we went out and did it, and it was evident, like, immediately, that the fans weren't buying into it. Especially now, WCW is starting to run those Northeast towns, and the stuff that would work in the Southern towns definitely would not work up there. And it was misery. Like when you're going to the ring and you're the face and everybody's telling you suck and you're going to get your ass kicked and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't work. Eddie had come to us with the idea of turning us heel. And Eddie had seen far years before I'd ever seen the heel in me, that, we could evoke that side of it. And I don't know if Eddie had ever given that idea at a booking meeting. All I know is that we did the best we could. And I told the story last night. In 2 days, the Dynamic Dudes were wiped out. Troy, New York, and Buffalo. The first night, now this is at the time when we were not allowed to fight outside the ring. The company did not allow that. And the crowd starts chanting, Sid, we're wrestling the Twin Towers. And Sid would go into this like glazed zombie look, like when he'd hear that. And he grabs me by the hair stiff, right? And he throws me over the rope to the floor. And I hit the floor, and his feet hit the floor almost simultaneously. And the crowd, Sid. And he comes over and he hard again, grabs me by the hair. And I'm like smacking at his hand, like, "Lighten up, dude, lighten up." And he goes, "I'm throwing you out." And after I said, "We are out." And like into the audience was a get fired move, right? So he starts to throw me towards the railing. And I'm gonna in my head, I'm gonna take it like a turnbuckle. Like I'm gonna throw myself into a turnbuckle. And he's so big and strong, he sweeps me around and picks me up and just launches me into the air. And I'm coming down, the railing is right below me. And so I'm kicking, trying to clear myself over. And it's either hit my ribs or my arms, so I put my arm in and broke my elbow. So I was out the next day. And Johnny, instead of putting Danny out there with Johnny, who could actually work a little bit, they put Sid out there with Johnny. So it's a curtain sellout, right? All the boys were at the curtain watching. And several minutes in, he clotheslines him right across and sees a big puff of red. Johnny goes down. They bring Johnny back, and he's really selling. He's going on. They put him on a table. And Flair, who's the head booker, comes over and goes, Johnny, relax, calm down. Let me take a look at it. So Johnny finally pulls his hands back. He goes, yeah, your nose is broken. And Johnny's, oh, Jesus Christ. and Flair goes, Johnny, it's just a broken nose. And Johnny's selling stuff. He goes, but my face is my gimmick. and the whole dressing room started laughing, right? It was just the things that you remember. And then that night at the Buffalo Hospital, I remember me and Zank took him to the hospital, and the doctor, like, sort of kayfabe told us, like, hold him down. And he took this long needle and stuck it up his nose and started like dropping up his nose. Oh. I was going, oh my God, this is crazy. 2 days, Dynamic Dudes wiped out in upstate New York.
Oh, do you know there's a curtain sellout? And there must have been that one for Sid and Dan Spivey versus that jobber. I think he was called Mike Blackwell, where he decided he wasn't going to sell at all immediately, and then he was killed in the ring. Metaphorically, but he might as well. And then he was beaten up even worse in the back. Apparently,
well, you're giving me all kind of news this morning that I was unaware of.
Oh no, I mean, I'm sure it would have been great for a 1 week ratings pop, but no, he was just bludgeoned in the ring, and then they bludgeoned him more in the back. I've already offered you the question on this one before we started. But the Jim Cornette match. So in our first interview, I asked you about a match you had with Jim Cornette. How come it was never on TV? And you said it was. And then I looked back and I actually asked Jim Cornette himself, and he said, well, a match between you and Jim Cornette was recorded, but you weren't happy with the outcome because you got some powder thrown in your eyes and you thought it made you look weak, and you mentioned it to Jim Hurd. And then it was another match was taped with you and Stan Lane. I've sort of given you pretty much everything that happened there, I suppose, but your memories of that day.
Yeah. Again, understand that in that team, me and Johnny, when you look at the Midnight Express, and I'm not trying to analogize us to them, put us on their level, but, Bobby Eaton was the worker of that team. Stan was the dancing, good-looking, smiling guy. In our team, the office was constantly telling me, like, I had to stay in the ring. I had to be in the ring. I had to do the spots. I had to do that stuff. And Johnny be the Stan Lane guy. And they were constantly beating me over the head with that. If the match was like 50-50 of each of us, they would say, get him out of the ring more. You're going to be in the ring more. Stuff like that. It was a constant reminder from the company. So I go into this match, he's telling me in the dressing room, and it wasn't just powder. It was like several things. It was like pulling gimmicks out. And it was in America, I don't know how familiar you are with vaudeville, but they used to always have this thing called the pratfall, right? Mm-hmm. The pie to the face. And there was an old time comic in America named Soupy Sales that was his shtick, right? Everything was a pie in the face or whatever. That match, as laid out to me in the dressing room, looked like Soupy Sales to me. And if I'm supposed to be the technician of this team, I'm in the ring with a guy that has, let's say his character was chicken shit, right? So he's afraid of all the wrestlers and everything, but he's going to get in with the technician of this team and just completely outthink him. And again, with any kind of storyline, there is a way. I always tell people we're only limited by what we create up here, right? So if there's a way for us to lay this out, Bobby or Stan hits the ring with the referee not seeing it, puts me down. Now Jim starts it, no problem. It wasn't that. It was me and Jim Cornette in the ring, and him basically having his way with me. And pie and the tennis racket, and pull the foreign object out, and it was one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. And knowing in my head, my young head at that time, that it was horrible. The way it was laid out was horrible. Even worse once executed, because you could tell by the reaction from the fans. As I came through the curtain, old Gene Anderson, who I had a world of respect for, and he was a very, very droll guy. Like he always sort of right here, and just everything matter of factly. And I came to the curtain, and he looked at me and he went, "That was the worst thing I've ever watched." And I knew from that learned eye, what I was feeling was accurate. Again, if there's a way we could have done that in hindsight, that it would have worked and told the story that was supposedly being told there, as executed. Understand that at this time in the business, I'm still very much the junior member, and so I am at this point deferring to Jim calling this stuff in the ring. And there's got to be a copy of that somewhere. I'd love to today get a chance to watch that back, because in my head it was the kind of thing that, like I said before, when you asked me about it, it did nothing to elevate Jim, because Jim was a chicken shit heel manager. It did everything to knock me down 10 steps. And if I'm out there wrestling Flair, say a year later, Are the fans going to remember me getting powder in the face and choked and slip on a banana peel and everything else? There's places for things and there's not places for things. Some things in wrestling work and some things don't. And I think at this point we can start to see with WCW them veering. Always in my head it was always WCW NWA was the wrestling company, WWF was the entertainment company, and I was fine with letting them be entertainment. I was drawn to the wrestling, and these types of things started feeling like we were being pulled towards that cartoon land. Let's face it, if you get Kurt Angle, great shooter, right? If you take a great wrestler like Kurt Angle and put him in the ring with Joe Blow, you wouldn't expect that Joe Blow would be able to just keep having his way with this great wrestler. Again, way we could have done it and the way it was done, it's incumbent on us as talent to know what our strengths are and to know if something is given to you that you think is going to be antithetical to what the company wants from you. It's incumbent to speak up. I didn't go to the dressing room and start yelling and screaming or go after Jimmy in the dressing room. I went to my boss and told him, this is exactly counter to everything you're telling me. So if you want me to keep going down this road, well, we'll just have to slip on a banana peel and get a pie in the face every week, or don't air that and do something different with it. Now, working with Stan, I do remember having singles matches with Stan and Bobby both because of the angle we were running with the dudes versus them. I don't recall a match being booked that was basically a rematch with Stan to cover up for that one. It might have been. I don't recall that.
I will. Well, apparently so that there was a singles match on the same set of TBS tapings and the Stan Lane one aired. But that is a fine answer. I will move on. Because you mentioned Flair, we'll just go to last match, Ric Flair, and then we'll get to a load of subscribers' questions and everything. But you must have seen at least clips, if not the full match, Ric Flair's last match.
Yeah. First of all, the whole build-up to this thing. Anybody that knows me is going to think that I'm sort of feeding stuff into my feelings with Rick, and it's not. I still really respect Rick's work, right, and his body of work. He's Ric Flair. Like, nobody is ever going to chisel him off that Mount Rushmore, right? I mean, good luck trying. To me, the overriding question was from the start, from the first time I heard this, why? First of all, being the measuring stick of the business. Terry Bradshaw is a great quarterback. I don't want to see him quarterback the Steelers next week. I'm sure he'll probably get a couple good passes off or whatever, but he ain't going to be the same Terry Bradshaw I remember. And let's face it, with Rick being such an amazing in-ring performer and being his age and being unwell, if you have a pacemaker put in, that's serious. I mean, that's not a today. By the way, I got a fingernail here. And, the things that we had learned about, the medically induced coma. I was talking to a friend, again, my medical school training. If you're put into a medically induced coma and come out of that, you should go play the Powerball, because you're very, very fortunate. That being put in that kind of a coma is extraordinarily dangerous, meaning you're in a very perilous state. And to see him come out now and go to the ring, and I mean, let's face it, it fell far short of expectations, I would think, of what we expected from Rick. I thought for sure he was going to try to get the upside down bump in. Like, if nothing else, he'll get the up over the turnbuckle and really pop the crowd. And that would be amazing to watch. The few clips that I'd seen of it and the stuff that I'd read about it after, there's an old saying here in America about attorneys being rubberneckers, right? There's an accident on the side of the road, they see money. You can't drive by an accident and not look. It's just human nature. And I think that was a large part of watching that, right? That is something bad going to happen in the ring to this guy? I think, from my 2 cents, again, why? I mean, you're going to pale in comparison to what you were before. You are the elder statesman of wrestling. There's nothing you can do in that ring that's going to alter any of that written, chiseled in stone history, other than to leave a really sour taste in people's mouths afterwards. I've always said about Rick, my personal opinion is he has forgotten who Richard Flair is. He, in his head, he is the nature boy 24 hours a day. And I think it becomes dangerous. When, I'm very cognizant of the fact that Troy Martin and the franchise are two very different people. And when I have long weekends out and you're in character for longer, when I go home, I find myself just mentally drained, right? Because you're evoking this character for more time than you really want to. I think in his head, whether subliminally or overtly, has a desire to, what's the only way that the nature boy Ric Flair can go out? It's got to be in the ring, right? I mean, what more poetic ending for the nature boy in his head? And if that were the case, the only thing that tells me against that, and I'm going to try to ascribe to Rick some humanity, having his kids and grandkids sitting at ringside, God forbid something like that happen. I would never want my children to see that. It just seems strange to me. And then like hearing these afterwards, his claim that he blacked out twice during the match, pacemaker, this is like extremely dangerous stuff. And, I wonder from the people that backed it, like Conrad, is there liability there? Like if something bad would have happened, would there be liability there? Whatever doctor approved him or he says approved him, it just seemed a very foolhardy thing to me. Going to fall far short of what I remember of the Nature Boy and what I want to remember of him as a character. I just think it was a really dumb move. There were a lot of people that were approached about being in that match. Again, no names needed. And most of them bailed out when they learned things, about the pacemaker and things like that. And I think wisely so. Somebody had asked me about the plus. My differences with him, something happens to him in the ring, like, my God, talk about an albatross, right? It was. I think it was just a really foolish thing for him to do, and hopefully he's gotten that out of the system. I want him to be the elder statesman. I would expect Ric Flair, the Ric Flair character today, to be pointing out all that is wrong with our business. What is different from when you were wrestling? What would you tell these kids if you were in the dressing room with them? Because my God, he's a fountain of information on that, right?
Absolutely. We will get off. I've got so many Ric Flair questions. They're too easy. You know what I mean? I think one for one podcast is enough.
The low hanging fruit.
Yeah, the lowest of hanging fruit. I mean, it's scraping, it's scraping the floor. I'm going to give you some different questions now. WWF. This guy, Championship Wrestling, says, who are your strongest advocates in your 1990 run in the WWF? And please give us your thoughts on that particular run and a decent push that never materialized.
I think that is 1990. I wasn't there in 92. But my first run in 1990, when I left WCW, I had just gotten so sick and tired of the politics there. It was just right before I left. In fact, the day I left, we were in Baton Rouge. I had been off for 3 or 4 weeks with, I think it was it was my knee. I had damaged my knee in a match with, I think it was Midnight Express in Bluefield, West Virginia, needed to have a scope done to my knee. So the whole time I'm home, just 3-4 weeks that I'm at home, I'm getting phone calls from all kind of people in the office telling me they're breaking me and Johnny up. These people were bitching about Sting and Flair, that they were being divas and pains in the ass, hard to work with. They were going to break me and Johnny up and give me a big singles push.
Sting. So what was Sting's role in this then? So
that again, what I was being told was that they were being hard to work with. They were, when asked to do something, they would say no. They would, it was just very difficult to work with.
I've got you.
And that was never prescribed to me or described to me what it was. Just that those two, singles were being hard to work with. So the very first day I'm back, I mean, literally the first day I'm back, we're in Baton Rouge and we're in catering and with names. Eddie Gilbert's first wife,
Missy Hyatt.
Missy Hyatt. I tell you with names anymore. Is this? I never was good at them, but now worse than ever. Anyway, Missy had come to sit down with me, had just come out of the production meeting. She was announcing, and she said, well, they were talking terrible about you in there. I'm just back. Like, what could I possibly have done wrong? And so I thought, well, at that moment, I'm thinking she must have mixed something up, right? Being Missy. So I go looking for Jim Ross, and walking down the hall, Teddy Long is walking down with Mark Callis, Undertaker, and he stops me and he said, okay, Shane, today in the third match, you're going to be working with Mark here. He'll take it in 2 minutes with the Hart punch. I said, I'll put him over. I'm not doing it that way. And I go look for Jim again, Jim Ross. I find Jim Ross. He used very colorful language to describe Teddy. And that's not what we told him. Go find Jody Hamilton. So they're sending me on this wild goose chase, right? Going here, going there, finding this person, finding that person. I finally find Jody, and he wouldn't look at me. If you ever talked to Jody Hamilton, he was a pretty straightforward, direct guy. But he wouldn't look at me as he's talking to me, and he kept saying, the last thing he said was, if you know what's good for you, you'll do what you're told and you'll fucking like it. I went, watch me, right? And I threw a garbage can at him, and I went to leave. And Johnny and Zank and Pillman came and met me in the parking area. They said, don't, you're walking out of this contract. Fuck this contract. Like, you're getting told one thing during the week. We're coming out here in the field and getting told something completely different. Going back next week and we get yelled at because we didn't do what we were told the week before. So I'm done with this, he went that way routine. And I had stayed in contact with Pat Patterson because Dominic had been, close with him and friendly with him and everything. And I never once asked him for a job. It was just like, hey, I'm checking in. He'd ask me, how's your career going? How's your body doing? That kind of thing. And I called him and they didn't have anything. He said, we'll give you an opportunity. So I'll take it. And I went up, and again, there was no, okay, Shane, tonight we're going to have this, start this angle with you. It was just sort of like I was thrown into matches. Okay, so tonight you'll wrestle Playboy Buddy Rose. Tonight you'll wrestle Steve Lombardi. Tonight you'll wrestle Haku, Black Bart, whoever. I always had great people to work with. And right towards the end of that first run, my first trip there, year and a half long, made good money, had nothing bad to say about the place. I loved it, and was able to have good matches every night with people I worked with. So I would say they probably were my biggest proponents. I know Pat liked me. Pat saw something in me. And we were in Pittsburgh at the Civic Arena, and Jimmy Hart called me into his room, and he said, Vince wants to turn you into a rock star. I used to play bass and, write lyrics and things. And he had 3 songs. One was American Girls, one was Rockin' Down the Hall, and I can't for the life of me remember the third one. But he had 3 versions on a boombox: rock version, pop version, and heavy metal version. And he had me sing the lyrics to all 3 of these musical styles, and saw that I found my voice range fell into the middle range, the rock range. So we were going to start to align these stories, these songs, write these songs in that key, and go in. And that's when the girls there, the 3 sisters, had made the denim outfit that had the conchos and the white leather and stuff on it. Those were tearaway blue jean pants and tearaway top. That was for that character. Vince wanted to see, if you remember, Vince, had tried his hand at boxing and bodybuilding and football and all these different things. He wanted to see if he could create a real rock star that could go, I guess, sort of like the Partridge Family type thing, right? Or worse, Milli Vanilli.
I was going to say Bad Street, USA, Michael Hayes.
Right. But I think that Jimmy had written some hit songs, right? And I think he wanted to make a legit go of this. Unfortunately, my father at that time had come down with stage 4 emphysema. And he'd never been sick a day in his life. And, here he's basically fighting for his life. When you're on oxygen like that, you can't live alone. It's very dangerous because you have oxygen. And if you leave a fire burning someplace, you can blow the whole place up. So I had to leave the road to go tend to my dad. And I remember sitting down with Vince in Niagara Falls. He and I walked over, again, very cordial, completely different than what I found 5 years later. We went over, we sat and talked for a good hour and a half. him telling me about how important family is, and I've been a good employee. The door's always open. Come back anytime. His exact words were, "You go home and take care of your family. I don't care if it's 1 year, if it's 5 years. When you're ready, your door's open to come back." So I, finish that first run out and leave and go take care of Dad. And Dad dies a couple years later. And by that time, I've been teaching. So the first run in WWF, I have fond memories of. I made good money, had great people to work with. Me and Marty and Sean and Dustin, the guys in the dressing room used to call us the Four Amigos because where you saw one of us, we all were. So again, 5 years later, I'm great friends with these guys. When we come to Pittsburgh, they'd stay at my brother's house. He was a set designer in Hollywood. Give them the key to the house, make yourselves at home. So 5 years later, I'm expecting hey, these are my friends. We're back together again, right? And vastly different time. The 95 trip and the 90 trip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a impossibly wonderful segue into this next question. Google user P, when he teamed with Marty Jannetty as a possible Rockers replacement for Shawn Michaels, how far along was the planning before the idea was scrapped?
Shawn had hurt his knee. I think it was just an off the cuff thing. Hey, we need somebody that sort of wrestles in that vein. And it wasn't it wasn't a torn ACL or anything. It was a month or two he's going to be off.
That is exactly what I've got now, torn ACL.
Is that right?
Yeah, so that'll be a year.
How'd you do that?
I'll tell you what, we're going to have a break in 10 minutes, I'll tell you then. But yes, Marty Jannetty, sorry.
Yeah. So, Marty and I, again, because I think from the office standpoint, they always see us palling around, right, these guys. We get along great. And, let's face it, I sort of wrestled in that same vein. And when they did it, it was getting over pretty well in the buildings. But I don't think that, at least as my memory serves, I don't recall that being a permanent thing. Okay, we're going to go this direction. Let's face it, Shawn was a commodity for them, a damn good in-ring performer. And I'm sure as soon as he came back, that spot, would have been back to him, unless they were at that point planning on splitting him. I don't know how tight that was to the barbershop and the whole angle between him and
that was January 92, so I think that was a bit of a way off.
Yeah. So, but who knows how long these things ferment in their heads, before they come out in real form on camera. But yeah, as far as I remember, that was never a permanent thing.
Can you tell us any good Marty Jannetty stories that you can actually tell?
Yeah. Marty, just in my memory, he's a great guy. Somebody who's really fun to be around. And there's two stories. The one is a little risque, but the first one is Marty. Cosmo, Iron Sheik, he had a thing about his amateur background, right? He was really proud about that, and nobody could take him down, type of thing. Well, his legs were bad at that point, and Marty kept leg diving him from behind. We saw leg diving him, take him down. And we were in Richfield Coliseum in Cleveland, and Marty kept taking him down, and he cussed I'm going to get you all stretch up, shove your head up your ass, that kind of thing. Marty gets him again, and he runs over to his bag and he pulls out this letter opener, but it's like a Arab type knife, right? Like one of those swords. And he goes after him, and Marty's running backwards, and he's going like this in his face, and Iron Sheik is swinging the knife at him. And Marty gets at him, runs, and he goes around the corner, and there's the Orient Express, right? Paul Diamond, Pat Tanaka, and Mr. Fuji. So Marty takes Paul Diamond's hood and puts it on. Here comes Cosmo around the corner. There's Tanaka, there's Paul Diamond, there's Mr. Fuji, and there's Marty in Pat Tanaka's mask. So he comes around the corner, he goes, Orient Express, most honorable, and he bows. And have you seen that motherfucker, Marty Jannetty? And Marty Jannetty goes, he bows him again, he takes off. Marty leg dives him, takes the mask off again. He's really ready to kill him, right? But that was Marty. I mean, Marty was always entertaining the dressing room. There was always somebody in the dressing room, regardless of company, that was always kicking things up and having fun and, keeping things light, because the road gets to be a pretty monotonous place.
I'll probably end up, that was an excellent story, by the way. I'm going to end up giving you one or two more, then we'll have a little break for a couple of minutes, then we'll carry on. Ibzan Arroyo, thoughts on Gorilla Monsoon? Any stories, any advice he gave, his role backstage, and how was he towards you?
once I was on the road, got along with them fantastically. I think those guys that were like old school guys, when they saw somebody coming into the business that had something, like I get it because I'll see a kid today, they have a ton to learn, but you'll see there's something there. There's a diamond in the rough. They're whatever it is, there's some kind of charisma there that you can sort of see in that rough. And I think those guys were like that. I had met Gorilla Monsoon years before I broke into the business. When I was in high school, we had through Dominic, I was senior class president, junior class treasurer. So we were, raising money for things for the school. And I decided to have a professional wrestling show at New Brighton High School with the WWF crew. We had King Kong Mosca, the big Mongolian guy that broke Andre's leg, Killer Khan, Andre the Giant, Moolah was there. I mean, it was really a star-studded group of guys. I think Morocco was there. And we ended up getting the first match on the card. Well, for all the ticket sales, right? Me and a couple of my friends were running these ticket sales around the county leading up to this. This is a big to-do. I mean, this had never happened in Beaver County before. And we were really anal about the money. Like if we took 10 tickets to this pharmacy to sell, they had to give us this much money back. And everything to the penny was on. I had been lording over that, right? So after the show, we go down to the school board room to reconcile the show, to finalize the show, the tally on the show. And Gorilla Monsoon was the agent at that show. We're kids. I'm a 16, 17-year-old kid at this point. And he starts to tell me that the till is like 5,000 short. I'm like, no, it's spot on, right? No, it's 5,000 short. And then started like throwing threats around, right? Like what he was going to do or what they were going to do. And I remember one of my friends that growing up, his dad was on the school board, Mr. Albanese. And Mr. Albanese came in and sat there for like an hour with the tickets and everything else. And somehow he was, and I think he was a little bit connected, Mr. Albanese, worked with labor and all that kind of stuff. And that was the last I heard of it. It was like he was going to take 5,000 from us one way or the other. And Mr. Albany's got that taken care of. And I reminded him of that years later. He said, "Oh, yeah, the games we play, right?" But I always got along, once I was on the road, very well with all those older guys. Rene Goulet, Blackjack Lanza, Strongbow, Gorilla. Because Gorilla all these guys could tell had a real love for the business, right? And when they would see a young guy come in that maybe has it, maybe doesn't, but they see something, you could go to those guys and say, "Hey, what'd you think of the match?" And they'd be honest with you. Well, you screwed this part up, but this was okay, that kind of thing. And I always found Gorilla to be one of those go-to guys that you could, trust and go, get some good feedback from him.
Okay, we're back from a little break and about 10 minutes of me explaining why I've injured my knee. I'm sure everyone else is bored with me talking about it, but if I've got a really bad injury, I'm going to milk it for all it's worth, let me tell you. This chap here, we're going back to WCW's second run. Michael Pruitt asks, was Magnum TA really the inspiration for using the belly-to-belly suplex as your finish, or was that just the kayfabe reason he gave on WCW Saturday Night in 1992?
Yeah, it was a little of both. When they first started talking about that on air, there had been no connection between them. Magnum hadn't been around. They were talking about it a few times at 10th and Techwood, which was the studio where we would shoot the Saturday night 6:35 show on TBS. We got there early, and he wasn't able to get in the ring and show how to do it, but he would describe and have, I think George South was there, maybe somebody was there to give it. And, if you remember, he used to do it off the run. And I had always learned it from stationary. So it was a little bit of a learning curve to get the timing down to when to hit that. And then later to understand that a lot of guys can't do that. You can only do that. Like, you see this belly to belly on Big E, right, on the floor, and he breaks his neck. Bonehead moved because a guy, just basic physics, you're not going to get a guy that size over that, overhead that quickly. And so you had to cater it, so like if Paul wanted me, say, working with 911, for instance, opposed to Taz or Sabu, very different execution. I can't get big guy over like that, but I can get the others over. And Bam Bam wanted that for the finish in the pay-per-view. And he was such a, you look at him and you don't see athlete, right? Because he's just this big guy. But my God, he was light on his feet. Like he was so just glided around the ring. It was amazing to watch.
Bam Bam will be coming up in a upcoming question as well. But first, Ken Terminates DQ asks, did Shane ever talk about his experience with his former tag team partner, Buff Bagwell? If not, then it would be cool to hear his honest experience with Buff, because according to DDP, Marcus's health isn't going well.
He's been banged up a bit. I just interviewed him a month ago or 5 weeks ago or so. Marcus is one of those guys that just easy to get along with. And he's had his issues. I mean, let's face it, in this business, it's that the issues with the opioids and things have run roughshod over our generations, right? I mean, killed half of us and screwed a bunch of us up beyond that.
I take it you've read Dope Sick, haven't you? Sorry, I take it you've read Dope Sick, haven't you?
I've not read it, but I've been through it. I had the issue with OxyContin, and it's an incredibly debilitating thing that you delude yourself to while you're doing it, right? I mean, you're I need this, I can't work without it, and looking back, my way of approaching a problem was always to try to wrap intellect around it. Like, okay, explain this to me, get my brain wrapped around this. And, having been the guy that never smoked pot, illicit drugs, whatever might be, I was always afraid of them. But this was being given to me by a doctor, right? And getting it at a pharmacy. So you just sort of in your mind, it's completely safe. A doctor's doing this. But back to Marcus, when they put us together, it was short-lived. And I think nobody's ever told me this. I'm just looking at it from where I stood. There were two guys that similarly built, roughly the same, had very similar wrestling styles, and had started getting over in their generation. And I think that was probably the impetus to putting us together. There wasn't a lot done there. I don't know how long it was they had us together, but it culminated, if my memory is serving correctly, at Bash at the Beach. They had us wrestling a match, and this was when they wanted to, started to turn me heel, or had turned me heel. And I'm sorry, that was later. I'd been heel, came into WCW that time as heel, and because of that history that's previous, they wanted us to have this match. And there was a lot of politicking going on in the building that night. That was the night that Hogan refused to lay down to Jarrett. There was, honestly, there were little forest fires going on all over the dressing room. And so I think just because the atmosphere, everybody was questioning everything, because it didn't seem like anybody was really in charge. There was just these, you'd be in the room talking to somebody and say, hey, we need you down here. There's something wrong with Hogan. And there's over here. It was really a chaotic dressing room, a lot of running around. And in short order, as I recall, camps started popping up. Like we're on this side of the fence or that side of the fence. And it became an issue. We later had the match. Marcus was a pro, and we've always gotten along famously. I mean, there was never an issue that I was aware of between us. Having been through that with the OxyContin, my heart breaks for anybody I see, especially my friends that I know going through it or having the issues with it. Because I mean, let's face it, we have a long enough history. We've seen this movie enough times. We know how it ends. Most of the time with that person dying, very easily to see how that person could become incarcerated. And I don't think that any of us in those younger stages of our career endeavored for, at this point of our lives, to be worried about being arrested or dying early. I've seen more death in this business than I care to see. And when it was going on in the early 2000s, it almost like there was this pall over the business. Like, this is what happens. You wrestle, you get to this age, and then you die. It was just it was almost like you were waiting for the Grim Reaper to knock on your front door. And then again, like I said, you wrap your brain around, going, okay, well, I'm doing this to myself, and if I can stop doing this to myself, there's no reason I can't be healthy. and just no, that is a super abbreviated, easy version of it. It was hands down the most difficult thing I ever did in my life, getting off OxyContin. It was extraordinarily difficult. So again, my heart breaks when I see anybody else going through that. And I wish best for all these guys. We'll all be in that hole soon enough. And I don't want to see us any leaving earlier than we should.
Absolutely. This sort of plays off what you were just saying beforehand, but what was the injury, or was it an accumulation of injuries where it got to the point where you had to rely on medication to get you through another match?
Yeah, again, very slow thing. I was probably about your age now, mid-30s. I've always been one of those guys that can't sit still. And so when I wake, I'd open my eyes in the morning, I'm about to bed, I'm moving around, getting some coffee and heading to the gym, doing whatever. I noticed that I'd wake up at this time, 99, I am laying in the bed for 15, 20 minutes before I get up. And doing this, then like draping myself off the edge of the bed and just loosening up. And I just didn't have that spark. Like I just felt like I was walking in mud all the time. And so I went to a friend of mine, a pharmacist friend of mine, and I told him, like, something's wrong. Like, I just don't have that get up and go anymore. And he was aware of how many injuries I'd had in wrestling and stuff. And he said, you need to see this doctor. My wife has fibromyalgia. She's been on the couch for the last 2 years. She's seen this doctor. She's playing golf every day. So I make an appointment with this doctor. And, far from what you see in these like documentaries and stuff today, this was not a pill mill. I didn't walk in and see this doctor and walk out with a script. I was in there for 3-4 hours. This guy, longest I'd ever been in a room with a doctor in my life. He had some kind of chiropractic experience. He was checking my back and checking this and looking at all these lab results. And he turned to me and he said, you have chronic pain syndrome. You're going to be on pain meds the rest of your life. And then he said these words: there's a new drug on the market. It's called OxyContin. It's a miracle drug. And, I'd been prescribed dozens of times over my career, Percocets and oxycodones and things. I'd take them for a day or two and then leave them in my bag in case I got hurt or somebody got hurt later. And 99 times out of 100, because of the moisture in my bag, those pills would turn into like a block of chalk in the bottle, right, because of the moisture. And they'd throw it out. So when I was prescribed these pills, I naively assumed they were the same thing as Percocets and oxycodones and everything else. I took the first one, the difference being when you take a Percocet or an oxycodone, or there are dozens of the same thing, basically the same ingredients, acetaminophen and the opioid, you get a bit of a euphoric feeling. You feel good. But if you think about it, when you're having that feeling, you're still in pain, but you're just feeling so good you don't think about it. The difference with the OxyContin was when I took that first pill, 10 minutes later, there was no dopey feeling or euphoric feeling, but the pain was completely gone. I was now 100% pain-free. That's different. Like I've never, and at that point, I had been putting off so many things because I didn't feel good. So I went home that day and I washed and waxed my car, my SUV, my ex-wife's car, cut the grass. 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm downstairs painting the basement. My ex-wife came down and said, what are you doing? I said, catching up on my chores. It was stuff I've been putting off. I felt good for the first time in 6 months. About 2 months into it, I had them on the counter right over my kitchen sink, and I got up in the morning and I popped it over and I put one in my hand and I went to take it. And I wasn't in any pain, so I put the pill back in the bottle, went about my day. About an hour or two later, I'm in full-blown withdrawal, never having done drugs before that. But somehow my brain knew that it was because I didn't take that pill. And sure enough, when I took the pill and it stopped, I now knew I was screwed. And I went to the computer for hours, looking for how do you get off this shit. And that started a 5-year odyssey of getting off it. I mean, it was really, really next to impossible, especially trying to be functioning on that, right? So when you go cold turkey on those kind of pills and you're in withdrawal, you're puking, you're pissing out your backside, you're freezing cold, you're burning hot, you can't sleep, you can't wake up, your skin crawls. It's just every awful physical symptom. And it persists for weeks on end. And so I was having these, this is why I was sort of semi-retired and was, I would take these 2-3 week chops chomps of time and go cold turkey and try to get off. They talk about the insanity of it, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I did this for 5 years, right? There was not a time from the time I was hooked on those pills that I became aware of it, that I wasn't trying multiple times per month to get off. So for 5 years, I'm puking and in the bathroom and freezing cold and sleeping and can't wake up and can't go to sleep. I mean, it was just this myriad of things. I was truly insane. I was like a hamster on a wheel, just going and going and going. And at the end, when I finally did get off, it was right after my second son was born. My older son had been oblivious to it. He was 4 or 5 at the time. And I was laying in there trying this same routine again. And I opened my eyes and he was standing at the bedside. And when he would get nervous, he used to do this thing with his hands like this. And he was standing there and his hands rubbing together. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, are you sick again? And dude, it was like somebody hit me in the face with a baseball bat. And I decided then it's either going to kill me or I'm done with it. And I went to, we were living in Sarasota at the time, went to Orlando, lied to the manager of the hotel where we put the boys up on TNA, told him I was going to be up there working on my book and did not, no maid service, no phone calls. If I need something, I'll call down. And I laid there for about a week in a puddle of my own puke and shit. And I knew I was going to die in that room. I had to get up and get moving or I was going to die in that room. And that was really how I was able to get off it. That wasn't the end of it. It was like 7, 8 more months of just abject misery. Your brain constantly telling you, take it, which is why I would never entertain again. When I was at the hospital weeks after, because I thought I'd screwed my insides up. We went through this thing where they wanted to detox me. I told them there was no opioids in me. They finally tested me and saw that I was telling them the truth. So then they're thinking I'm some kind of a basket case, right? Like this guy wants to get detoxed, but he's already detoxed. And I was worried that I had done something to my insides because I did not feel well. I felt really sick. And that was like a 35-day stay in the hospital. While I was in the hospital, I'm meeting with the psychiatrist and psychologist. And he's asking me like how much I'm taking. And I told him I was taking 51 80 milligram Oxycontins per day. He said, no, you mean a week. I said, no, 17 in the morning, 17 in the afternoon, 17 in the evening. And he said something like, there's never been a documented dose that high that didn't kill somebody. And I said, I ain't bragging to you. I'm telling you what, I'd get a prescription for 60 pills and it would last me a day. So for whatever reason, it didn't get me. I'm really thankful and appreciative and blessed to be here. I'm not going to look that gift horse in the mouth twice. Been there, done that. And when I know what my friends are going through, because I've been through that, my heart breaks when I could just give me the assurance, just hang in there. It does get better, but that's in that moment doesn't help them very much.
I've heard that. I've heard you tell that story very eloquently once before as well, and it's a very important message to get out there for people who are possibly going through the same thing as you did as well. Right. The ending of the story, I believe this was on like a U shoot with Sean Oliver maybe 10 years ago, something like that, is that you were working for TNA at the time, and Dixie Carter let you go on television and explain the situation that you were now finally clean, and then she rewarded you by firing you straight afterwards.
Correct. Yeah, it wasn't on TV. For the life, I could see the guy, again, earlier with names. He was the guy that wrote the articles online and print for TNA. And Dixie had come to me and she said, look, he wants to do an interview with you, but this is your private life. You want to keep it separate. And I respected that, but I also, like you just said, that's very important to hear these stories, because rest assured, somebody watching this is going through this. Mm-hmm. And we all know somebody that either died to it or was going through it. The U.S. government is pretty damn complicit in this. But there's a myriad, like for instance, I don't have a higher power, right? I am agnostic. And so I find it nebulous to try to imagine some higher power. So the traditional 12-step wouldn't work for me. But I went through and adhered to those parts that I thought did apply and would work. And, just immersed myself in it. And that chewing that time up was incredibly important to getting off of it. But when she asked me to do this article, I sat down and we did a 3-4 hour interview. And I had quoted that in there, that, there's somebody else out there going through this right now. And if I can help a single person to try another path and than to go down the path that I've been down. I'm all for that. And got great response. I still get occasionally fans coming to the table and saying, hey, and it's been so long now that I what do you talk about? And about the pills and this kind of thing. And so it has reached a lot of people. But the reason the thing with Dixie letting me go was especially cruel. Was the conversation that Dixie Carter and I had 90% of the time, very seldom about wrestling. There were those conversations that she didn't understand, obviously. But we'd always talk. She had, I think, a daughter or maybe 2 kids, and I had 2 sons. And we were always talking about each other's kids. And I was, not by her, she had Bob Ryder call me and tell me that, like, they weren't bringing me in for TV that week. And it was right before Christmas. And so I thought to myself, okay, so you wanted me to come out here and tell this story for your company, to turn this into some kind of a kitsch moment for you. And then you deprive my family of Christmas right after that. I think, like I told Chris earlier today, if you work with somebody long enough, you'll meet the true them. And I think that day I met the true Dixie Carter. I don't think, and I don't mean this as any kind of backward slap, I don't think it's a surprise that she failed about as miserably as you could fail at being a wrestling promoter, right? All the money in the world, great outlet with Spike, a damn talented dressing room, and completely devoid of the desire to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. To wrap it up, I'm sure if somebody is going through that kind of thing, just Google help, and there's no better time than to start than today. So I think that's...
Amen. Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to hopefully slightly more light-hearted fare. Some more questions from the fans. Instagram, a wrestling historian, asks, what was the plans for your feuds with Brian Pillman and Ric Rude if they hadn't joined the WWF?
First of all, both of them are such amazing performers, right? I often talk about when you're watching not just wrestling, any entertainment form, and there are those entertainers and those wrestlers that when you watch them, you can't take your eyes off them. Ric Rude and Pillman were both that in spades, right? You like in Brian's case, almost like a train wreck, right? Like any second, something insane could happen. But also very good in the ring. Both of them at that point, Ric was unable to really get in the ring and do much physical. But I was such a fan of ravishing Ric Rude, the character, that you can see in Cut the Fucking Music, Cut the Music. I mean, there were a lot of parallels there that I drew from him. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten to ECW, Ric was one of these guys that when I met him in 1990 in WWF, he struck me as being a very intelligent guy, not book smart type guy, right? But if he was talking about steroids, for instance, or supplements, he could tell you almost like a doctor, take this on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at this time of the day, and an hour later take this. And I mean, it was just like you're dealing with like a PhD here, right? Unfortunately, most of those guys that were brilliant with that kind of thing would later reach a point where they say, well, if 2 are good, 10 would be better, right? And start down that. Ric was incredibly frustrated in ECW because he, again, we spend this kind of time in the business, it's because we're huge fans of it, we're marks for the business. I can't imagine being that close to the industry with the fervor that was at ECW and be unable to get in that ring and do it yourself. Because, there's always I can do it better than this kid.
I apologize once again for interrupting. What exactly was Ric Rude's injury? Because I know he had the back injury and then he claimed the Lloyds of London thing, but what was stopping him getting back in the ring? Was it the injury? Was it the fact that he was getting paid by the insurance, or both?
Well, I think both, because at that time, a lot of those guys, all the Minneapolis guys, had sort of figured out how to bilk that Lloyd's, right? Mm-hmm. But at this time, and I can't remember, again, it's been too long for me to remember how tight in time this was. But if you recall, like a year or 2 earlier, he had taken that bad bump in New Japan, or the WCW, where the ring was up on an elevated stage, and he took like a plancha from inside. And when he went back thinking that the floor was behind him, he went off the side of the and I don't know, he broke his neck, messed his neck up really badly. And by the time he was in ECW, it was clear that he was clouded. There was an incident with Pitbull number 2, who I'd always had great matches with. And Anthony always trusted me. That put me at ease in the ring. We were in, I want to say Scranton, Pennsylvania, or maybe, no, it was Trenton, New Jersey. And in Trenton, they had this CYO where the upstairs area, the dressing room area, were a bunch of these little, like 2-3 people dressing rooms. And it was a 6-man tag that night. Anthony had never second guessed me on anything, on any spots. We'd go to the ring and have great matches. That night, it was a triple threat against him, Gary, Wolf, and I think Sandman. And the time constraint on it was that, okay, since I'm angled with Anthony, we'll get in, we'll do a spot. Then Bam Bam, you get in and do something with him. And then Chris, you get in there and do something with Gary. And so you only had that time. Boom, 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 in and out and get to the match. I give him this spot where I get the better of him for a second. And then later he catches me. I try to do the same thing again. He catches me, presses me over his head, and throws me to the floor to Bam Bam and Chris. 2 minutes later, he comes back to the dressing room and he goes, "Don't you think that spot makes me look stupid?" I'm like, no, and I'm explaining it. So, okay, I do this to you, and then later you do that. It's like you're smacking the fly. Okay, and he leaves. 5 minutes later, comes back. I don't know. And this goes on several times, and I finally, the last time, lay back but follow him back to his dressing room. And Rick Rude's in there. He left the door cracked, so I look in and I can hear them talking, and Rick Rude's telling him, "He's making you look stupid." And I couldn't understand. I'd always got along with Rick. I couldn't understand why he'd be telling him that. So that night we were out eating, and he said, I confronted him about this, not like a confrontational way. I asked him, and he said, "Okay, you're a shitty fucking heel." I said, "I'll bite. What makes me a shitty fucking heel?" He said, a great heel always has more heat in their hometown than anywhere else. And I was always popped in Pittsburgh. So my answer to him was, I looked at Paul and I said, "Do you want to answer this or do you want me to answer?" Because that was what Paul wanted, right? Paul came to me and saw that we could do like this inverse universe in Pittsburgh, because like this booking you couldn't do anywhere else. And it sort of got after it, struggling. It's like, this wasn't Rick. Like Rick was always an easygoing guy. And it wasn't long after that he succumbed, right, and passed away. And, it was almost like the Elvis Presley thing, right? Taking pills to wake up, taking pills to survive the day, taking pills to go to bed, drinking on top of that, all this other stuff. And there was just this very volatile character that I'm sure must have been frustrated by not being able to get into the ring. But to Brian Pillman, the quality that he had in the ring, the magnetism that he had in the ring was based off of, I think, that always right on the razor's edge. Like something disastrous could happen here at any second. And the types of things that he would do, the one time when I confronted him down in the ECW arena, it was just supposed to be a melee and then out from that. We fight out to the floor, and he has a chair, has to take the chair from him. He wants me to hit him with the chair. So, in ECW, you swung the chair, you swung the chair. And I'm swinging this chair full blast. He turns around and grabs this baby, an infant baby, and pulls the baby up in front of it. I, luckily get the brakes put on, but it came this close to smacking that baby. And I was obviously pissed, right? I mean, this is way beyond the pale to me to doing this kind of thing, and how that could have disastrously turned out. But that's where Brian liked to play on that razor's edge, like to bring that in and out. Brian was, unbeknownst to us then, he was playing WCW against ECW against WWF. And I think Rick was doing that maybe to a different degree. Those guys always knew that being in WWF first, WCW second, ECW last would be the pay scale, right? The WWF, WCW, ECW. And so I don't think either of them had plans on putting down roots in ECW. The goal for both of them was to get back there. And with Brian, I have evidence of that, because there was a interview that I did with Sherry Martel on one side and Brian on the other side. And it's one of these long-winded promos, and about halfway through, I start shooting on Hogan. And and I noticed as I finish up, they're here tight at the start of the promo, and they very slowly melt out of the camera view when I start shooting on Hogan, right? They it was obvious they were looking to get back to one of those companies and make bigger money. I think with either of them, with Rick coming there, if you remember, his stated reason was to fuck with the franchise. So it was putting the franchise through this 12 steps of Hercules tasks, that he's got to keep overcoming. And I don't know if Paul was planning on turning the franchise babyface after that or what, but that would have been a great way to go to get that character there. Instead of just, hey, he's a good guy because we say he is. Pillman, though, I think we would later see with the stuff with the accident and the broken ankle and the gun, and, all the things, that was Brian playing out Brian's thoughts in the business that were incredible and really did blur that line between what is reality, what's kayfabe, what's wrestling.
Absolutely. Next question then, and we're going to go back to ECW and
great questions, by the way, from the fans.
Oh, thank you very much. There's all my questions. I'll just give them different names. I'm just kidding. I'm still claiming the credit, though. I picked him. I can at least say that. Right, BMAC, what was your initial reaction when you first laid eyes on the masterpiece that is the San Francisco Toys Shane Douglas figure?
It was sort of surreal, because the ECW was still just this tiny company at that time. We talked earlier before we went on the air about being contemporaneous and looking at everything through that lens. Mm-hmm. At that time, we knew that we had an incredibly loyal following at ECW. We weren't aware at how broad that was. We knew we had an audience in Pittsburgh and Buffalo and Philadelphia and New York, but maybe Fort Lauderdale. But to us, it was like the little train that could. In years since, I think we've all had our eyes open that there was a lot more of this tape trading and stuff going on than we had anticipated at the time. But to go in there and to see that figure, this is sort of like in wrestling or entertainment, I guess. If you have an action figure, it sort of legitimizes it, right? Okay, so like now we're like the big guys. We're doing the same type of thing as the big boys are doing. The downside of everything with ECW, the yin and yang, Robbie Kanoff, who was the executive vice president of San Francisco Toys, was a dear friend of mine. And, he is the one that had gone to bat. Huge wrestling fan, been hanging around with Flair for years and then been around the business forever. Excuse me. Paul had granted him the rights to these characters, but Paul didn't have the rights from our characters, right? Very few of us were under actual written contract. My contract with him always was a handshake. We prided ourselves on that we didn't need paper. So when these figures came out, I went to Robbie and I said, what's the royalties on these going to be? And he looked like shocked to hear that question. And when he told me that Paul had told them that the ECW, the company, owned all the rights to these characters, and they had never verified it. And because they didn't. I can't speak to the other guys. I knew I owned the franchise, the Triple Threat, and all Shane Douglas and all of that. So now, we're in a place. Here's a friend of mine that's done a pretty good thing for ECW because that puts us on a different level. Do we start to throw lawsuits at them and bite the hand that feeds us? And I was never going to do that to Robbie, but I made him aware. When Paul tells you things like that, verify it. It's the old Reagan thing: trust but verify. But it legitimized us in a way that at that time in 94, 5, 6ish in that range, pay-per-view was like sort of the Nirvana land for professional wrestling, right? If you've made it there, then you can see you're starting to make some headway. We were, I forget if the figures were right before or right after. They were tight in time. And so we start to see these things from the boys' point of view. We're on pay-per-view now, and we're getting these action figures put out. And there's other things happening. It gave the sense that the company was moving forward. In hindsight, again, no royalties from the figures. The video games,
I don't think you were in the ECW games, were you? I think you left just before. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right on that. but when those games came out and they were sold, that first one I had heard, again, I've not been able to verify because I'm sure there's no records if there were, that they paid him like 50 or 75,000 for the rights to that game, the first one. And the first week they were on the market, they sold buku's amount of this video game. And Paul went back and allegedly granted them the rights for like $10,000 or $20,000 more for the second game. And, which just doesn't make sense. And so to this day, we'll never know if Paul was skimming money from that stuff, or he actually was just that bad of a businessman and didn't realize that he had him by the balls. And by the way, Acclaim Video that got the rights to those two games for pennies also were given the lion's share of the assets to the company when it went into bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. So not only did they make a mountain king's ransom on the video games, they also got pretty much all of the royalties or assets that were left over for the company. The guys all got screwed again.
Like Tony Khan, maybe Paul Heyman needed somebody right under him to take some of the to pick up some of the slack in business or hard decision terms. Somebody suggested this question to me, and they reference that I interviewed Francine not too long ago, maybe late last year, and I asked her who her favourite outside entity was coming into ECW. And she said Scott Hall. Now, this wasn't the first time Scott Hall came to ECW. He was just coming backstage. This was the second time after you left, and he was there for a couple of matches or whatever, and that was it. But then she also mentioned, and you know where I'm going to go with this, there was a confrontation with you and Scott Hall in the back. I'd never heard of that until Francine mentioned it to me, so tell me how that went.
Yeah, we were in Kissimmee, Florida. This is not long after I've left WWF, months. And to be fair and full disclosure, those guys had pulled an awful lot of politicking stuff. I mean, the stories that the fans have heard about the Click are renowned, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all pretty much accurate. So again, like I said earlier in the interview, when I was talking, when I go back there in '95, Scott Hall had hung around me and Johnny in WCW for most of his run there. 90, me and Marty and Sean and Dustin, of course. And so, like, here I am 5 years later, Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels, guards down, right? I mean, these are my buddies. And, they went full bore at that. And because they had Vince's ear, they had, control over that. And were allowed to get away with that kind of stuff. So when we're back in ECW, okay, so now this is my playground. This is where I have sort of sway. I was in the dressing room, and there's a funny little side story to this that goes along with it as well. I'm in the dressing room, and our head ticket taker comes back and says to me, "You'll never believe who's getting ready to walk in the back of the building." I said, "Who?" She said, "Scott Hall." Well, I stood right until my pouch off, and Paul Heyman came over and grabbed me and said, "I forbid you from touching him." What do you mean you forbid me from touching? He said, because we had a pay-per-view come up, pay-per-view with Taz where I would drop the belt. He said, if you touch him now, you'll be arrested and you'll miss the pay-per-view. So I sort of understood, there's some truth to what he's saying, but, this guy had, and it wasn't just me in that dress. You had Tracy Smothers that they had screwed with. You had Chris Candido and Tammy that they had messed with. Bam Bam Bigelow that they had messed with. There were a lot of other guys in that dressing room than just me. And so when Paul tells me I can't hit him, I said, what if he swings at me first? He said, take him out. So I can make any man swing at me, right? I thought. So I go, when you walked in the Kissimmee building, there was a big door, garage door, and then there was a smaller door in that you would come through, and it was lower. Scott's a big guy. So in my mind, as I'm recounting this story, I see him walking in backwards under that door and pulls it shut. And he turns around, he's eating a hamburger. And he turned around and he's like, stopped dead in his tracks, standing right there in front of me. Stops dead in his tracks and he goes, "Hey, franchise, how you doing?" I said, "There's a lot of fucking balls coming to this building, right? There are a lot of guys in this building you screwed." And there was again, my impetus at this point is to try to get him to swing at me. So I had the blessing of, being able to retaliate finally. And in my memory, I recall that the building went completely silent, right? Tracy was in the ring with a bunch of the kids, like he always did, working out with them. And a bunch of the Francine and Tammy and Sean and Bammer and every, they're all spread out around the bleachers, just hanging around. It's early in the afternoon. And I think Scott realized he wasn't getting to first base with me, so he started looking for friendly faces. And he turned over and he looked at Candido, and he said, "Hey, Chris, how are you and Tammy doing?" And Chris stood and said, "Fuck you, Scott, oh, you screwed us too," or something like that, and walked up. And then Bammer is all spread out, on the bleachers up there. And he goes, "Scott, what about you?" I said, "Are me and you still cool?" And Bammer stood up and pulled his tights up and started coming down out of the bleachers. And Scott started backpedaling. And Bammer put his hand on his shoulder. He said, "You're the backpedal for me." He said, "I'm not going to do anything to you." He said, the franchise is going to kick your ass. He said, "The franchise is going to kick your ass. You got a lot of balls coming here." And now there's like everybody is, tensed up, waiting for this to happen. And so I'm thinking I've got to get him to swing at me, or this is going to look like a really lame dance that we're doing, right? And so I started saying things to him that would certainly make me swing. And it didn't. He put his head down after a while, and I put my hand on his chest, put his chin. I said, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. Again, waiting for him to throw. And so the nuclear bomb that I had to throw at him was, I asked him, I said, everybody wants to hear the answer to this question. What exactly does Vince McMahon's dick taste like? And I'm ready to block and fire back. I'm thinking he's coming. And he's looked around and put his head down and turned around and slinked out of the building. I mean, for a split second, I felt sorry for him. Like, this is pathetic, dude. Like, you just got punked out in front of a building full of people and did nothing. What I didn't know was that PJ had invited him to the building, and I had no clue of that. So later that evening, Jill, his wife, and PJ are coming to me. "We're so sorry. We didn't mean to," and I didn't even realize it. So I honestly, I was mortified, because if you invite somebody to the building and you have a right to be there, then it far be it for me to say no, right? So I ended up buying them a real expensive bottle of wine and apologizing to them. But that was the deal that happened with him walking in there. And again, it wasn't. To me, you've got to be real with yourself. So like if I'm, I've been public and I've said a lot of things about Flair and Vince. These are things that I would say to their face if they were standing here, and I've said to Rick, to his face. Bad me if I say, "Oh no, Vince, I never said anything. I think you're great." If he were standing here, that's not like where I come from. That's not who I am. And there were those types of things that went on a lot of times. ECW, from the outside looking in at that time, for those guys, like when I went up to WWF in '95, they were all talking about ECW like this was some kind of a fight club or something. Like there was something more going on there, nefarious going on. Vince and Pat would always, and Jim Ross would always pick my ear about, why the blood and guts, and why the barbed wire, and why this and why that. And they just didn't get that was all the fluff and stuff to the angles. That was the steak on the plate were the angles and the characters and the violence to it. And they didn't get it. So there was a lot of that went on, confrontations between different guys that had been different places that would end up in an ECW dressing room. But, when you look, again, looking at it for the time frame then, these guys in the business are reading in this dirt sheets then, because no internet, and they're reading about the ECW locker room beating this building up, beating that crowd up, right? And it's like, what are these crazy guys here? And there was that aura that preceded us before. Scott said to me one time in WWF while we were there, in front of the dressing room, "Hey Shane, we're us WWF guys are as tough as the ECW guys. You can lay your stuff in with me. You don't have to." And I was being cognizant because in ECW you laid stuff in, but I didn't want to get up there. Somebody say I'm stiff or potatoing them or whatever. So okay, tell me once, I got it. So I went to the ring that night and I didn't throw taters. I threw ECW shots. That next night, after saying that in the dressing room, he came back and complained in the dressing room about how stiff my stuff was in the ring. And I thought, like, Jesus, like, last night you say this, and you could knock my teeth out. If I said that last night, I ain't coming in here tonight saying that, right? But, that was the dance that was Scott. And it's a little epitaph because, we're, at the stage after his passing away. Scott, I thought, was a good performer when he was not around that clique shit and around that politics crap. Great guy to be around. But he always struck me as somebody, and this, like, even when we were getting along great back in the, driving with me and Johnny and stuff, there was always something tragic about him. Like, there was always like something more you're waiting for him to say, and that never quite came out. And, you hear the stories now and you're like, oh, I'll sort of get something, but a shame, and gone way earlier than I would expect any of us to think to be in that hole. And like I said earlier, I don't want to see any of my friends or coworkers anymore die. We've seen plenty of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to probably ask you one more question from the fans, and then we'll get to the main event, which I actually need to apprise you of what the main event of this show is going to be.
Cool.
Let me see what I'm going to ask you. Somebody else asked this, is when you left in 1999, ECW still had a lot of stars. Mid-sized arenas were getting packed out, games, merchandise, pay-per-views, as we were alluding to just before. Aside from when checks started bouncing, can you pinpoint exactly when you decided that ECW maybe either wasn't going to make it long-term or that ECW was no longer for you?
Yeah, well, it was a while, because there was this dance that we would do in ECW. It doesn't take a mathematician or a brain surgeon to look and see, go to dressing room full of salaries, airfares, hotels, per diems, and you can see what the crowd is bringing in. In those early years, we're wrestling in Jim Fort, Pennsylvania, 150 people maybe in the building, and the checks are clearing. Now we're wrestling in front of 5,000 plus people and bouncing like a rubber ball. For me, I was always pretty thrifty with money. So I would go to Paul and tell him, like, look, the Chris Chettys and Danny Dorings and Roadkills and Mike Whipwrecks, these guys, they're living check to check. Some of them have kids at home. I can forego a few weeks of no paycheck, to take care of those guys. And well, he started to. And then it started growing. Now, this had happened previously, so it wasn't necessarily a red flag when it started happening. There were multiple times, 2 or 3 that I can recall, where Paul would fall behind on my pay. I think previous high before that was around $36,000. A chunk of money, right? It's it's not going to make you independently wealthy, but it's for a blue collar income.
You'll miss it.
Fair amount of money. Yeah, and but then he would do something like I'd run a 3-town loop, and the third day he'd give me the entire gate, even if it was more money. Right? It'd say he owes me 30, and it's 36,000. Yeah, just keep the rest. And so I had no real reason to not trust him. And where I started putting myself behind the 8 ball was when I would promote the Pittsburgh towns, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Northern Ohio. That was my area to promote for ECW. That I learned very quickly, if you buy, say, a $5,000 TV ad spot, Paul may or may not get the check to you on time, but he'll probably most definitely not get the tape into traffic on time. So you've paid for this time, you're nothing errant. So rather than stress myself out like that, I would just pay for the stuff up front and then get reimbursed on the backside. Unfortunately for me, this is now when ECW is started, the debt is starting to go like this. Mm-hmm. And again, I had no reason to not believe, to not be faithful in Paul, or that he would screw me, until it got to a point where it was, a lot of money. And it wasn't just money that I was owed. It was probably better than half of that was money that I had spent out of pocket promoting shows for Pittsburgh. So it was really putting me in the hole, like doubly in the hole. And the last night I worked for him, didn't know it was going to be the last night, but I was the guy in the dressing room telling the kids, I've seen this before. You might want to start looking for greener pastures because the ship's going down. And I think from Paul's point of view, again, not a good thing, not a bad thing. I was describing it. He would have known. So like Shane Douglas, who's been around the business for a good chunk of time, he's the one that can flip this whole thing, right? If he gets them to all walk out with him or something, or to see what exactly is going on here. And the last check he gave me, $5,000-$6,000, something like that. We were in the New York area. I forget if we were in New York exactly or close to there, but we stayed in town an extra day so that Monday morning we could be at his bank to cash that check and beat all the others in. It was an odd meeting because we went into the bank and the teller told us there was plenty of money in there, but that she couldn't cash this check. And I said to her, got a manager, and I told the manager, I said, "Is this your bank?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Is that a valid check?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Then by law, you have to cash it." And she went and called Paul and came back and said, he told me to cash it, but he never wants to see your face again. Tell him he never will. And that was how my end came in ECW. Although there were a few things after that happened, but suffice to say that the money bouncing like that, we love this business, but we pay our bills with this business. And just like somebody working in a grocery store or an office building, when that check comes, our bills are as real as anybody else's. Right? When my electric bill comes, I need to pay my electric. When my mortgage comes, I need to pay my mortgage. And I do this in order to facilitate that. So when this becomes an issue now, that's dropping further and further and further behind, it's just a matter of time at that point. Because again, we've seen that movie. Now that movie ends, and the shame of it was that Paul had an amazing ability to understand what the fans wanted, and then to either bring them ever so closely to that or swerve them. But either one draws money. In my experience, he was probably the most prescient of bookers and company owners in that sense, because you can watch it on any of that ECW footage that still holds up today. Unfortunately, all respect to Paul, a great booker, not a businessman, right? And unfortunately, we all learned that too late. Mikey Woodbreak, not Mikey Woodbreak, Joey Styles, Taz, Tommy. There were a whole bunch of us that were doing other jobs for the company behind the scenes that we weren't being remunerated for. But we knew that if we didn't do it, it wasn't getting done. So unfortunately for all of us, we all were in the same vein thinking, okay, like it's a little rough spot. It's going to come back. We've been here before. And at that point, the ship was too far gone. I'd taken on too much water at that point.
Right, okay, so I thought I'd do for the main event of this show, we'd do an updated version of the Dean's report card where Shane Douglas will put on his figurative mortarboard. Yeah, your spectacles, the figurative mortarboard, and you are going to grade some of the modern professional wrestlers on 4 different categories, and then we'll have like a weighted average of all of them and see who comes out on top. So we have look, promo ability, wrestling ability, and it factor / superstar quality. And the first one I thought I'd throw to you is Seth Rollins.
Seth Rollins certainly has the X factor, right? Has the look. $1 million in that respect. Me grading him on like the promo and the wrestling stuff, just a little disclaimer, understanding that industry is very different from the industry that I was in. So I guess in that WWE model, he obviously is giving them something they like, right? So I would say from that point of view, his promos that are canned there, and his wrestling ability, I guess, for an entertainment company. I've seen him work on independent shows in other places and see a different side of him that I don't see when he's performing before them. And I wish he would let more of that out. Again, it's been so long since I've been up there, been around people, talked to people from up there. I don't know how much they micromanage. In my experience, it was quite a bit. And to me, when I say X factor, to me, there's the part of that X factor is charisma and the way you carry yourself and all of that. But also that X factor is what's that extra ingredient that you can throw in that's going to make the fans out there watching go, oh, okay, this is something special here, right? Something different. Sabu's is the explosiveness. Mine would be the promos, right? Terry Funk's is the way he carries himself, that old coot character. But I don't think that I've seen Seth do that while there, and probably not allowed to.
Mm-hmm. If you were, it might be a bit too difficult to, because you won't know a lot of these new guys enough to give exact grades for those 4 different categories. But I might just ask for the grades right at the end then. So give us the next one. Chris Jericho in 2022.
Obviously, right? He's got the look at his age, promo ability, well honed over decades in the business. The wrestling identity, I think, is probably the strongest brand they probably have there right now. And the X Factor. Jericho's always had that. When he came to ECW as a young guy, there was that something you could see in him, that X Factor. But these guys, the guys that have been to the WWE, like him, Punk and some others, they've been to that big dance, and they know how that big place works, which is why I expect a little bit more out of those guys when stuff like what we had talked about earlier came up. I've always been a fan of Chris.
Next one, I'm not sure you've seen him, but Bron Breakker, Bronson Rechsteiner.
Yeah, I've only seen one clip of him, and based off the things I've heard, I mean, obviously the look, right, has that. You can see that X factor, although it's a bit nebulous right now. That will hone in time. The wrestling factor, based on the clip I saw them, very much in the vein of like Scotty or Ricky, which makes perfect sense. And I think there's a place for that in the business right now, a big place, right? That we've gotten so much into all this other stuff that there's a niche for somebody to do what Braun does. And hit him all the local promo. I've never seen him do a promo, so I can't say based on it. But based on what I've seen and what I've heard, I like what I've seen so far, and the stuff that I've heard, and I've met him. It seems like a really, really nice young guy, and looks like Scott and Ricky, right? The bulldog part to play.
Yeah, he does promos like Scott and Rick as well. John Moxley.
Okay, Moxley, the same thing. I mean, for me, my take on John has been that when they had him in that character in WWE, that obviously was a straitjacket to him, right? Because the stuff I'm watching him do now is compelling. It brings you to the edge of the seat. To me, if you said to me the one person in AEW you want to watch, I would say Moxley, because there's that bit of a not quite sure what he might do next. And that lures me. That's a hook to me when I'm watching him. And just a little side note, as a longtime performer, he looks liberated there. He looks like 1,000 pounds have been taken off his shoulders. So the promo stuff, understand promo stuff to me is a hair different to like somebody else, because there's some that are very good at it, some that are good at it, some that aren't good at it, some that really stink at it. And there's a place for all of those, right? Like, you don't want, if everybody came out and got on the stick and hammered the 10-star promo, there's really nothing special to it. So, but Moxley, I think I see a lot of just the what's the word I'm looking for? The charisma, and he looks like he's been let out of the straitjacket, like he's finally able to do what he wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Next one, the Young Bucks.
The Young Bucks, I think they represent what a lot of today's younger generation does. So many things swirling here, and I don't want to sound like just the old guy that's going to crap on something. Again, through contemporary lens, kids today, my kids included, my phone's over there charging, but they spend their day doing this, right? And they think that it is so earth-shatteringly important that the world hear what Shane Douglas is thinking right now. So I got to go take my dog for a walk, but I'm going to stop here and try taking my dog for a walk. Now the whole world knows I'm taking my dog for a walk. Who gives a shit that I'm taking my dog for a walk? The narcissism of it is astounding to me. Why not say, hey, we got this big match coming up, or, here's how we're getting ready for this match, or this is what happened last weekend, or whatever. It's not that. And I think because there's a narcissist factor that comes in that everybody has to hurry up and get on this thing and tell my side of the story and get everybody in camp. So these people are with me and those people are against me, or maybe just keep it quiet and not air it. Maybe have some class and some tact. My take on the Bucks is they fill a need there that AEW seems to be reaching for. The people that can get online and draw an audience and pull the audience that way. For the life of me, I cannot understand why Vince does this. I cannot understand WWE. I keep saying Vince, probably always will. Or why AEW does this. Here we give you this pay-per-view, we give you this TV show. Half hour later, we're going to be on the internet stooging everything we just did and giving you the kayfabe side of it. If you and I are angled for WrestleMania, and we being the company, spent millions of dollars and hours of time prepping the audience to see you kick my ass or vice versa, what sense then does it make for the week leading up to WrestleMania, you and I to be at WrestleMania experience in tuxedos, having a glass of beer together? Right? It just pulls the rug out from everything. I mean, be there, have your beer, but don't be standing right next to me doing it in the same thing back. I'll never get that side of it. I think the Bucks are representative of their generation, where my generation was taught, unless you are 100% certain you can hit this spot safely, you don't do it. And there were a lot, you rarely ever in my career see me kip up. I was taught that from a very early age in the business. Promoters would often want me to do that in the ring. I didn't do it because not one time out of 100 I would miss it. I wouldn't quite get it. And as a result of that, I was afraid to try it in front of the camera and then look like a real dumbass, right? The kids today, Bucks included, do some very dangerous stuff in the ring. And I'll give you an example. When they had the four-way tag match and the one kid got knocked out because the Bucks hit him in the wrong place. You have a doctor sitting at ringside. You have a guy who's clearly knocked out cold here in the ring, and people still bumping all around him. What if this guy has a neck injury or he broke his back? You just paralyzed or killed him. And then finally, one of the kids trying to do the right thing, not the Bucks, but one of the other kids, grab him by the hand and drag his lifeless body over, which in medical terms is the absolute last thing you ever do, right? And the doctor sitting right there and watching the whole thing. The handful of times I've watched them, they take these crazy bumps, on the apron up in the air, landing on your chin and the body folding up backwards. When you're young, you can do that. You might do that spot with the knee injury. And I'm sure you've ridden your motorbike around down there quite a bit. All it takes is one, right?
Yep.
And in that, first of all, an apron doesn't give. That's the most unforgiving part of the ring. It's not going to give you any bounce or give. So you land on your chin and land that way. All it takes is your head being turned an eighth or quarter of an inch this way or that way, and you're in a quadriplegic. Again, I'm all about the safety. And I think those kids, again, from my scant watching of AEW stuff, seem, not just them, but a lot of their generation, to just do this crazy. If you land, great. If you don't, sorry. And that doesn't suffice to me. The last thing in the world I want to do is ever, really cripple somebody up or do real harm to them. And let's face it, what we do in the ring is dangerous enough as it is to not want to just voluntarily slough off that safety factor. Like, that's no longer important. So I think for them, like in their promo style, they fill that bill for what the online kids want to see, and they certainly have a draw and affinity to that. They, to me, need to start to represent what it is they seem to be in the company. If Tony Khan's made them executive vice presidents, what exactly are they doing as executive vice presidents to earn that extra pay? At that age in the business, I would have had a snowball's chance in hell of figuring out what I was supposed to do. It's nice if you want to be cool and say, okay, give a big paycheck and a fancy title. If that's what it is, it's probably wrong, because the other kids in the dressing room are wondering, why are these guys making that much more than us and have these titles? It becomes a cancer. Sorry to go long-winded on that, but I didn't want to just go straight down the list and make it sound like I was just crapping on them, because they do bring something to the table for them. right?
Definitely. Right. I think we've maybe got 3 minutes left in our little interview thing, so I'm going to run through about 10 names. If you haven't got an opinion, just tell me to move on. But we'll have to spend maybe 20, 30 seconds on the rest of them. Drew McIntyre.
Big guy, has the presence. I think he's outside his element. He looks to be somewhat classically trained, old school trained, but seems to be trying to fit that in square peg in a round hole.
Nick Aldis.
Love Nick. I think he's exactly what the NWA needs right now in that championship role. Nick's always been a class act, and he's diligent about his industry and his craft.
Britt Baker.
What I'd heard about her really had her built up. I'd only seen, again, full disclosure, one match of her in Pittsburgh, and the fanfare that I'd heard prior was, man, like she's like here somewhere. And I was completely underwhelmed with what I saw on Pittsburgh in ring. I don't know. I'm sure she's a great person. It's somewhat unfair to throw somebody into a main event spot or these accolades. I think of Eric Watts off the top of my head. This is a very difficult industry to learn, certainly even harder to master. And so when you tell everybody this lady's basically the second coming, which is the way it would seem to sound to me. And then I watched her really mess up some basic stuff in the ring. We all make mistakes. So it's not like I've never made a mistake in my life in the ring. But I think that she's 1/3 of the way in the direction she needs to be going. And my experience with the reason I point that out is that for people that get handed to that top spot, they usually don't seem to appreciate that top spot or understand what the spot is.
Let me think. I'll give you about 5 more. Austin Theory. Okay.
Don't know.
Walter / Gunther.
Walter,
apparently.
Yeah. Same thing. Because I watch so scantily, don't know much about him. I see that they give a lot of accolades. Am I correct? Does he have an extensive amateur background?
Great question. I'll move on. I have no idea.
Yeah, right.
Well, I was going to ask Matt Riddle, but I don't think you will have seen much of Matt Riddle then.
I've seen a few things from him. I understand the sort of like the Fast Time at Ridgemont High type character, and he certainly has that because he has the shoot fight background. Bleeds in there a bit. I can't understand what the attempt is to have him telling these stories about Goldberg. It just seems like left field. If it's something I'm reading online, it's like the reason I don't like Goldberg or whatever. Well, again, who cares? It's irrelevant. You're never going to work with the guy.
Well, not now.
So, yeah. But I see something in that character. But what I'm hearing about WWE, and again, it's only what I hear. I don't watch to see it to verify it. I've heard that Hunter is going to make the kids in NXT now call it in the ring. And if that's true or not, I don't know. I would be curious as to how they would do it because they've never seen it. They've never done it. It's a completely different beast to what they're used to. So, but I'm willing to give Hunter the benefit of the doubt to see if he can bring the WWE back more in that direction. I'm questionable as to whether he will.
2 more then. Kevin Owens.
I've always loved Owen. I've been around the business for a long time. My thing about Kevin, and it's, each his own. Like we each create our own character, right? He's amazing in-ring ability, but he looks like he just left the Kmart on a shift, right? Look like the star that he is, right? Because he's damn good in the ring. For me, I don't know if it's the company telling him that or if that's just what he's comfortable doing. But, and I don't mean he needs to be out there in sequins and a burning cape or whatever, but look like a wrestler.
And the last one, Danhausen. Danhausen. So if you don't know who Danhausen is, then that's a skip straight away then.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, of all the people I mentioned there, who's the guy that you think is the top of that list that I've given you? I mean, you were very happy with Jon Moxley, Seth Rollins, Chris Jericho, a few others, Bron Breakker. Who's the head of the class on that one?
Well, I just by pension of reality, I would say you have to go with Jericho. But Jericho is obviously he's at the ladder stage. He's on the downside of his ladder. I think Moxley could become the guy. Like he seems to be working in that vein. there's something fascinating about what he does with his character. And to me, he looks. I didn't like him at all in WWE. There was nothing about him that I was drawn to. So I was reticent to even watch his later stuff now that he's back in AEW. What I have seen, I still see a few vestiges of that, which makes sense. I mean, it's the same guy, but far more compelling on camera into what he's doing in far better matches.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. Well, that wraps up a good old 2-hour interview. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me. And here's to many more. Here's to many more. I don't suppose you've got any plugs that you want to throw out there?
Well, actually, yes. If you go to Francine's Twitter, my Twitter account at the Franchise SD, at whatever Francine's is, we've been working on something on the side, something a little bit different, like sort of a talk show format, but with our friends, right? These are the conversations we have on the road. These are the conversations we have in the dressing rooms. And we're bringing a little bit of that to the internet to see if the fans would want to see more of that. The guys, we find that the guys, when we're sitting in that kind of a venue, we're sitting around here on the couch here or whatever, that they're a lot more open and talking and shooting in the sense of telling the legit side of the story. And so we found a format with Luke Williams, Brian Nubbs, Jerry Sags, Francine, myself, just sitting around just shooting on topics of the day in the business. Things like next time we shoot, we'll probably be talking about the AEW stuff, the Flair match, whatever. But we've all posted up links to that on our Twitter and our social medias. So I'd love to hear the fans' feedback on it, good and bad.
Yeah, okay then. So I'll direct everybody to that. The links will be in the description. They'll be in the description of every clip that I post of our interview. But for now, thank you very much, Shane, for joining us. And thank you for joining us. And I hope we do part 3 sooner rather than later.
Yeah, sounds good, James. Always good to be able to take care of that. And for your fans out there, appreciate it. Great questions.